these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
For insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
We hold these truths.
with Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
All right, welcome back, everybody. This is a bit of a special episode, not the usual policy wonks that we generally talk about. But I got an old friend of mine, Mike Hayes, and me and Mike know each other because he was one of my first mentors in the SEAL teams. Mike was a lieutenant commander going to the Harvard Kennedy School while I was doing my undergrad at Tufts and, wanting to be a SEAL. And I was in ROTC at the time, and so Mike was kind enough to do workouts with us, mentor us, and eventually write me a recommendation to go into the SEAL teams. And so really cool to have you on, Mike, and we'll just rehash some old times, talk about SEAL teams, talk about everything you've done since then, and we'll go from there. So where you're in New Hampshire now, and heck, man, like. I guess where do we start? Let's start with how do we first met? That's how I recollect it briefly. I mean, how do you recall that? And I remember one thing you saying was it was so important to you, and also important that guys like me carry on this tradition of just helping people walk in the same path that you walked in, right?
Yeah, absolutely. First, Dan, thanks for having me here. It's such a pleasure. No one's prouder of you and more impressed with your continued and unsurprising success. Awesome to be with you, brother. Look, the thing that I remember most is all about service. So a lot of those conversations, and it's living a life of helping others, which I think it's safe to say both you and I have done sometimes successfully during our lives. Kennedy School, I remember about 2000. I was there 03 to 05, and 2 years of fully funded grad school, no real obligations other than to attempt to get smarter. And I went to the ROTC professors and said, "Hey, I do these workouts at the footbridge every Friday at 6 a.m. Let anybody who wants to come just show up." Well, in that first wave of folks between Harvard, MIT, BU, BC, Tufts. Were probably 40 or so guys that showed up, and they're very quickly, once the weather got bad and things were a little less comfortable, that group winnowed down to 10 or so pretty quick. And gosh, I could go on forever, but you were in that first group of people. And, in the very beginning, I was crushing everybody in the workouts. It was so fun. It fed your ego. And the truth is, after about maybe, I don't know, a month or month and a half, once everybody figured out what we were really doing, everybody beat me at things. And you were certainly first and foremost among that group. And we had a nice little session once a week for quite some time. And it was a lot more than a workout. It was also just about talking about life and what it means to ultimately be a contributor and a citizen and a positive impact on communities and the nation, and ultimately the SEAL teams. I mean, I could go on and on. I have a lot of great memories of you, Dan.
Well, thank you. I think I did miss one workout, but it was like the day after my 21st birthday. So, is what it is. Excuses. Hey, SEAL teams, man, we work hard and play hard. So I guess I think my audience has probably heard me talk about plenty, how I ended up in the teams. I mean, one thing I tell people all the time is you're not going to make it through training unless you've always wanted it, unless you just never gave yourself a choice. Because when it gets really, really hard and it's really easy to say, I don't know if I really want this. I mean, I could die. I could lose an eye. I could get shot. Like those coffee and donuts, they sound really nice. The instructors keep talking about them. And time again, you talk to other team guys and they're like, yeah, I mean, I just always wanted to be a SEAL since I was a kid. And there was just there's never even a choice there. So, I mean, for you, when did that happen for you?
A little bit later than you, I think, because I came in 1993. The way I got exposed to the SEAL community was as a freshman at Holy Cross College in Worcester, Mass. There was a a Navy SEAL named John Connors who was killed in Panama, and there was a memorial service in the church at Holy Cross there, and I got exposed to what the SEAL community is and what it's about at an early age. And then also, my grandfather was at Pearl Harbor December 7th, 41, and lived a life of service himself. So between growing up listening to my grandfather, my dad, and then seeing it firsthand, I just really wanted to try the hardest thing. I like you just said, Dan, I never aspired to like go be in combat or to get shot at or rocketed or any of these things. I aspired to just go try the hardest thing. And when you're 21, just kind of, like you just said, work hard, play hard, and see what you can do, and just lean into the hardest challenges. So, guys like you knew what you were getting into because 9/11 had already happened. So I would say that in many ways, you were making a much braver decision at that age than I was.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just didn't really think about that, to be honest. The post 9/11, but because before 9/11, people ask, like, did it change something for you? Did you, is that what caused you to want to go in the military? And I was like, no, because I already had the dream, right? I already read Dick Marcinko's books prior to that, and that like hooked me into everything SEAL wise. And you've got a book coming out, which we're gonna talk about, called Never Enough. But man, that's like the first SEAL books were the Dick Marcinko series, and they're pretty cool. They were sort of a mix of fiction and nonfiction. To this day, I don't think anybody really knows, but the guy's a tendency to exaggerate. But like, so there are a couple things associated with it. It's like, one, the SEAL mentality is you want to go to war, and it's really hard for like regular people to understand that. But second, it's like you also want to do the hardest thing, and you want to be part of the most elite and most adventurous group that goes to war. And the SEAL culture and ethos is really about cultivating that reality. And I think that's what draws guys to it.
I agree. I believe that, when you're one of 19 graduates from a class of 120, I don't know what your class's numbers were, but I'm sure it's something similar.
The same, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you just say to yourself, if not me, then whom? And so it's a combination of a sense of obligation, and then when you look at all of the different people who are doing things overseas, you just want to get into the mix in a way that you can demonstrate leadership and achieve outcomes in ways that I didn't really think about as a kid. And so, I think the opportunity to really serve in combat is something that I don't want to say aspire to, but you just, the test of who am I is something that people wonder. But like both of us, I'm sure it's like once you live through real things and you're actually shot at and actually rocketed, et cetera, you really have the words of wisdom back to people. The younger versions of ourselves is something like, hey, be careful what you ask for, right? And so it's kind of like you need a combination of youthful energy with slightly older wisdom, and then collectively, that's when you're really in the sweet spot.
But so even though you were, as a young officer, you were serving pre 9/11, and it's important to distinguish between young officer and more senior officer, because I mean you commanded SEAL Team 10. And just so people listening understand, I mean, from you kind of lose your operational status, meaning like you're not the guy bursting through a door once you're past the 04 level, hell, even at the 04 level. So but you've got some interesting stories in the mid to late 90s, right? So tell us about that.
I do. It was really the era of let me actually even start earlier. Dan, when I was on a very peaceful, fun-loving deployment to South America, I ended up in a situation where a car that I was in got carjacked. We were actually training the Peruvian Navy SEALs, and Sendero Luminoso is a Shining Path is a terrorist group down there, and myself and one guy got pulled over and held at gunpoint and threatened with execution. And I was in a spot where I could have jumped out of the car and definitely saved myself, but I knew that they would have killed my swim buddy and the guy that I was with. And I just very vividly, at whatever that was, age 23, remember thinking I could never jump out and save myself at the expense of somebody else. And so you really get to learn who you are. Same thing like Bosnia, Kosovo, the late 90s. Absolutely. Like you take risk and you think about risk, you try to mitigate risk, but there's unquestionably things that we did that were risky. And then I would also challenge a little bit of what you're saying, because, yes, as a senior officer, you don't have to go out on the missions. Man alive, like I probably in Iraq, I probably rolled out with the guys every third night or so, maybe every fourth night, something like that, because I think that leaders have to take the same risk as their teammates, and also just understand what are people going through. And so with that exposure, you actually end up as a better leader. And as a commanding officer of SEAL Team 2, I went out, I don't know, maybe it was 10 missions over a handful of months instead of like the 150 that the guys went on. But still, you can get at age 41, I got pretty surprised on a few operations when you're like, what the hell am I doing at age 41 doing this? And I have a lot of respect for Tom Brady as he's 43, So anyways, back over to you, Dan.
No, yeah. Well, that's true. But to be fair, like that's rare though. It rarely do the COs go out, and but you can. I mean, to your point, you definitely can, and it's awesome that you did. I never commanded a SEAL team, of course. I was, the whole I thing, had to leave the Navy. Something about some kind of medical disqualification. But I would have, if the opportunity's there, you'd certainly want to. I think I was actually on a deployment where our CO did go out a couple times, man the turret. But you have some interesting stories though in Bosnia, Kosovo, I thought, right? I mean, tell us about what that was like, because everybody always hears about 9/11 and post 9/11. I feel like America's pretty well informed about these particular wars. Well, maybe not as informed as they should be, but generally. But America's involvement in foreign affairs started long before that. So I mean, what the heck? I mean, just give us a 30-second overview of what the conflict is even about, what America's involvement was, and what you guys were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Recall the Dayton Peace Accords were the framework agreement to try to create separation between two ethnicities. Both Albanian, but on the Albanian Muslim side and the Bosnian side. And so what was important was gaining information about what was happening on the ground. So, without getting into anything classified, everything I'm saying is unclassified, but our missions were to try to figure out what was happening on the ground. So we went out in very small groups, 4 and 6 people at a time. We'd stay out in the field for 3 to 5 days. And this is the late 90s, right at the edge of like near real time imagery, night vision. And so there was one particular night where we observed a foreign nation's forces actually arming the Bosnians.
Yeah.
And we got pictures of it. And all of a sudden we were like, oh my gosh, what in the world, what's going on here? And we sent some of those pictures back, and long story short, we ended up having a handful of armed insurgents go try hunting us down, and we were never found because we were hidden well. We were SEALs doing the SEAL thing as best we could. But as I remember, 19 men actively hunted 6 of us. Several times at age 27 or so, in charge of 6 folks, I finger on the trigger and just saying, if this guy looks, points his weapon at me, I'm going to have to shoot him. But in those situations, if you shoot somebody, you've actually created a much worse situation. And so we successfully avoided shots fired, and we stayed hidden and got out of there. But that was the kind of era it was. It was very much what we call reconnaissance and surveillance, which of course well, Dan.
Yeah. I was just going to say it's a classic special reconnaissance mission, which we trained at that particular scenario quite a bit still. But it plays out very rarely in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, I guess it could, but just for a whole number of reasons, it doesn't in the same way. And those international incidents that would be created by what you just stated, it's just totally different, right? Every war is different. Every conflict is different. And what I liked about the teams, it was, maybe I shouldn't blow up everybody's spot, but the truth is, like, very few of us ever actually read a field manual, right? Like, this is the doctrine of tactics that you use to engage in a situation. It's just not how we operate. I mean, we practice a lot of different scenarios, and we encourage outside the box thinking and just logical processing. right? And quickly weighing the costs and benefits of an action and thinking logically through it, and not believing necessarily that there's a specific tactic or solution to every problem. And I'll tell you what, that served me pretty well in life, I think, later on.
I agree. I think the thing that's above that really is the tactic of agility, right? It's how do you, no plan survives first contact with the enemy, but in the teams, we're already planning for that plan to not survive, right? And so our plan is to how do we plan in the moment, and how do we look at the outcomes we need to achieve in that very last second with little bit of time, and risk adjust the different paths we can, and how do we create cultures where the 21-year-old new guy can raise his hand and say, hey boss, I think that's a terrible plan, and here's why. I think we should do this, this, and this instead of that, and that. And,
right.
you and those things, and so it's a much different much less hierarchical organization for the good of the organization. And like you said, I think the organization learns from doing and thinking and critiquing, and like everything, and what I talk about a bit in the book is about reflection. It is about being really objective about who we are, what we do, and then reflecting on it. And then like in those debriefs, which very well, it's not what did you learn? It's how do you learn? I like to say, like, we teach people how to think, not what to think, because you're never going to be in two same situations. And so if we can draw out the deeper why and the kind of the principles, the framework around why you did something, that's replicable in a future situation. And so I know you've experienced that a lot too.
Yeah. Especially I'm in political debate all the time. So, being able to, and people are like, well, there's probably not a lot of parallels between that and the military, and actually there is, just because in the way that we have to think through problems in an extremely objective way, and your argument better be right, because it's life or death, because you might argue over the right way to do tactics or the right way to do something, so you really have to think through it. And too often I think in political debate, nobody's really thinking through it, they're just stating a position, and it's easy to state a position, especially to people who already agree with you. But it's harder to persuade people of that position if you don't truly understand it yourself. And I think, a kind of a dynamic thinking that the SEAL teams encourage is, in hindsight, I didn't know it at the time, and it's only taken me a while to even realize that that's what happened. But it certainly helped me in that regard. And it helps in business too. So what you read about in your book is taking those lessons, applying them to business, applying them to leadership, applying them to just personal growth. And one thing you said, which maybe I could ask you to expand upon, but you can expand upon whatever you want, was the sort of flattened hierarchy that happens in it happens in the SEAL teams, does not happen in the military. And it's an interesting balancing act. And I would always sort of give advice to future leaders on this. And I'd say, like, you can't be too hierarchical. It doesn't work in the teams, but you also can't be their best buddies, and they have to still know who's the boss. Now, that's a really hard thing to do if you don't have the right, I think, personality for it. But if you can make that balance work, it works really, really well. And I try to, run my team like that too. Like they have to feel open to come to you, but once you say no, they have to understand that that's the answer. It's difficult to have that balance, but it's essential.
Yeah, well, Dan, let me actually do the Washington, D.C. thing back on you, which is not answer the question you just asked. I think you've probably gotten really good at that. I'll come back to the hierarchical thing. But hey, like it's like in Fortitude, when you talk about like low ego and calmness, I say calm breeds calm, excitement breeds excitement. You use different words, but the concepts are all the same. How do you have something happen and remain hyper rational, like meaning ultra rational, and just slow things down? And that's where like our past really serves us well, right? Because when you're getting shot at, you're thinking of, you're in supercomputer mode in like split seconds of fractions of a second. And I think probably what you've been served well by is when you get asked these really hard questions in these political debates, I've observed you do this well through your whole life, but to just slow things down. What's the question? What's the premise? Is the premise right?
Yeah.
If the premise is wrong, let me attack the premise of the question, right? Because so many people just make the mistake of answering a question when the premise is false.
Yep.
And so it's really just that logic 101. And so I don't know, I'll pause, but I'd love to talk about the hierarchical and the balance. But I think really the real answer to your question is your ego.
Yeah. And like, so I'll give one more analogy and then, but I want you to address the hierarchical part, because it's an interesting thing that people don't realize about specifically the special operations community. But what you got me thinking of is like, okay, I found an analogy in politics to a firefight. So, and oftentimes they're a little too similar. Unfortunately, I joke around. They're like, yep, every job I've ever had, people are trying to kill me, literally. So it's not good. But if you're in a firefight, right, and you're on patrol in Afghanistan, it's happened quite a few times, and you start taking fire from somewhere, and an emotional response, an aggressive emotional response would be like, just charge those MFers, right? Just go for it, right? A more rational response would be to stop, look around, look at your surroundings. Where's the cover? Where are your maneuver elements? Okay, base of fire, maneuver fire, boom, you win, kill the enemy. Sounds a lot more boring, but boring is good, frankly, when in a situation like that. It gets me thinking about how my political life is, because, look, a lot of my activists want me to go charge. Like, hey, you're getting fired at, you just charge in front of, you just go at them. And I'm like, no, like, you've got to, and then it makes them mad. 'Cause like, you're not a fighter, and I'm like, really, guys? Like, no, I want to win. I want to define fighting, right? And winning or fighting means, well, fighting should have an objective, and it usually should be to win. And, it's a good way of thinking about it, but yeah, but please go on with, talking just group dynamics, social dynamics in the teams.
Well, I think it's like you said, once you've defined the outcome you want to take, then it's really thinking. What we do is, like, I like to talk about dynamic subordination. As we think about the goal at hand, who is the person who is best placed to play what role? And we do that so well, irrespective of hierarchy, because I like the analogy of let me think, for example, a jump master. We're getting ready to jump out of a plane at 20,000 feet. I'm overall in charge, but there's a SEAL who is in charge of deciding when we get out of that aircraft. Mm-hmm. That's not my specialty. I didn't grow up doing that. That's that person who is overall in charge of when we get out.
Yeah.
And so, and just like in a firefight, there are some people who will have better vantage points than others. And so, do you want to make decisions based on someone's rank, or on who has the best point of view and the best information? So I think that flat organization really came out of necessity, right? Because that flat organization respects the fact that everybody is capable, everybody's intelligent. It makes some basic assumptions around everybody's ability to think and communicate. And that's why that foundational training, to me, was so important, because now we know what we can count on for each other for. Like you said, even if we've never worked together, I know what I can count on for if you're a graduate of SEAL training. Like, we share that immediately, even if I never knew you. So that's just a real interesting dynamic that we can just pick up and run with.
Yeah, well, but that brings up a point, is the kind of shared experience aspect of it, which means a shared trust, and that's something. So you left when did you retire?
2013.
2013. Then you went to the business world, and so you don't have that shared experience when you're in a company. Like, not everybody went through the same training together. So I think as I kind of think, I'm literally like just sort of thinking through this as we talk. The reason that you can walk that fine line between fraternization and hierarchy in the SEAL teams, whereas you can't really do it in the rest of the military, and it's also difficult to do in a corporate hierarchy or corporate setting, is because of that lack of shared experience. See, we, like, as officers, enlisted, everybody, we have to go the exact same gauntlet of hell that is SEAL training, right? And, like, sometimes you break a leg or whatever. And I actually remember, I think we had a conversation when I broke my leg, my first hell week. And so I got double the benefit of training. I got to go through first phase like twice, kind of like 1 3/4 of a time, which makes me a better SEAL than everybody else. So, and so like that, but that shared experience is really interesting. And I wonder, again, with your experience in the business world, a lot of people listening, that might be their world. How do you make that shared experience happen so that you can have that interesting group dynamics that we're talking about, but that are difficult to replicate?
Yeah, it's a great topic. I think the answer is in defining the shared outcome that you want to achieve. So like right now, I'm in a role as the chief digital.
You can't just make everybody go like run into the sand in the ocean for like a week. Like you can't just do that in a corporate setting.
I try it every day, but everybody revolts and says no. No, I think it's really a matter of saying, okay, we want top line growth. We want to run profitably. We want to return capital or return to shareholders. We want to have positive impact in the world. We want to think about the non-financial returns that we can create in the world. I'm in a role with VMware, which is one of the largest multi-cloud software as a service infrastructure organizations. And we're going through a transformation, but the thing is, an organization is always transforming, right? And so I like to think of transformation as always ongoing and to some degree never complete, because what's really important are those fundamentals like you just described earlier in the SEAL teams, but it's a matter of extracting the commonalities of like what do we want? We want simplicity in an organization. We want clarity of roles and responsibility. We want to align responsibility with accountability. We want to get the maximum effort out of everybody in the minimum amount of time. We want to have a hell of a lot of fun doing it along the way. And so a lot of the things, while are there's a lot more in common with the private sector than there is than one would believe.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, shared outcome, I guess that's how I have to do it too. Just running a team on Capitol Hill. I can't make everybody, have some kind of shared suffering. The shared suffering is dealing with me. That's how everybody like, that's how they all bond with each other. Just kidding. Ethics. Everything's fine. All right. I know you guys are listening.
Don't look here.
Yeah. No, it's fun. We have like a really fun time, and so I've tried to like adapt that sort of leadership style to here, and also everybody just really wants to do a great job. You don't get paid a lot to work in government, but people are really passionate about it, and so it's not just shared outcome; it's like a cause. And that's another hard thing about transitioning from the military to a corporate setting is like, it's a job now, and it doesn't feel like the cause that you had before. It doesn't feel like the mission. And so how do you replicate that?
Yeah, Dan, I'm so glad you just raised this, because there actually is a mission. And the truth is, a lot of people in the private sector don't necessarily see it at the very highest level. Let me explain a quick framework going back to Econ 101, which well. GDP is just the total economic output of a nation or the globe, right? And so it's just labor times productivity. So with labor, there's really it's fertility rates and immigration policy, right? But the big driver is the productivity factor. Mm-hmm. And so like a company like VMware, while really enables that productivity for a million other places. And so there is a shared mission, because while you and I were SEALs, the nation is really just making a decision to spend money on SEALs. Mm-hmm. If we can drive GDP from our private sector seats in ways that can give more options to policymakers like yourself, now with more GDP, you get to make the decision to either buy SEALs or healthcare or education or police or whatever it is. And so I think that at the highest level, the private sector is giving incredible optionality to the policymakers that we have. And I can imagine with much more economic strength, people like you can make those decisions that are really, really needed for the nation and that you're entrusted with.
That's a good way of putting it. And yeah, you have to make people feel like their little piece of the puzzle actually matters. And you can make a good economic argument for it, like you just did, which is like, okay, so you're basically a force multiplier in your particular company, because you're making people more productive and therefore more valuable, which contributes to the overall success of the country. And, and a company could be like, just, I don't know, the widget they make is just good and people like it. And like, that's all it is. I mean, purpose is everything in this life, And so is that sort of the theme? Let's go back to the book here. So like, again, this never enough is what it's called. So, that implies that it's about a lot more than just how some of these leadership qualities apply to the civilian world. What are some other themes in the book that you want to talk about?
Yeah, like you just said, it really is about meaning and impact. It's the more we can handle and produce and inspire and do, the more we can help others, right? And so the concepts around, I remember applying for the White House Fellowship. One of my 200-word essays was something around why you want to be a White House Fellow. I very vividly remember writing, I don't just want to positively impact the world. I want to positively impact others to positively impact the world. And then you have that nonlinear effect on the world. And so to me, I really think that is what life is about, is how do you empower others? And so the foundationally, the more excellent that we are, the more of a platform we have to help others. I mean, look what you're able to do now versus what you were able to do 10 years ago. You can much more positively impact so many more people.
And I have half the eyes. So it's like,
Well,
I don't know.
ratio.
Yeah, that's true. I'm just more efficient. With my, I don't know. I was thinking of defunding the White House Fellows program, since I have now the power of the purse up here. And you know why.
Yeah.
I guess so I got a recommendation from you. This was, it was so, most people who listen to this kind of know my story, but yeah. So, I mean, literally the day I was medically retired from the military, I was in classes at the Harvard Kennedy School. Ironically, that's where you were when we first met. And so I was there, 10 years, literally exactly 10 years later. And then White House Fellowship was one of the things I looked at, but I didn't get in. And before we started recording, you had a text that we exchanged at that moment from those SOBs at the White House Fellow program.
Yeah, I will bring the fight to DC if you try to defund the program, man.
Bring it on.
In all seriousness, let me scroll back here. This was awesome. And so, yeah, I did, for the audience, I did Dan's letter of recommendation to get into SEAL training, to get into Harvard Kennedy School. And I think when I was cleaning up my hard drive, I think I flipped those to you over Christmas. But then here's a text back from that time period.
Because I did not, just for the clarity, I did not get into the White House Fellowship, which is also why I'm here. So yeah, that's I don't know if I was clear on that.
Okay, good. So Dan, remember, this is 2018, May 22nd, 2018. Dan, remember what I said to you when you were rock bottom and pissed about the White House Fellowship? I told you a parallel story about me screening positive for development group and then my commanding officer not letting me come home from deployment and go to training. As it later turned out, everything worked out fine for me, and I said things would work out fine for you too, and you'd be great in the long run. Like me earlier in life, you just couldn't see it in the moment. You are now living exactly what I told you would happen. I'm not at all surprised. I'm deeply happy for you. Love to be able to say I told you so. Remember, so then your response was awesome. Yes, sir, you were right. I will reluctantly admit. The reluctly is the key word there, Dan, because you don't do anything without
other people being right. It's painful for me.
No, but let me keep reading. We have seen many obstacles. This is a quote from you I love. We have seen many obstacles in our life that are not obstacles at all. In hindsight, they're just events that push us toward the right path. Everything happens for a reason. And if you would have been picked for the fellowship, dude, you would not be sitting in the chair you're in. You wouldn't be having as much of a positive impact on the world. I'm certain of it. And so it's just really awesome to see you here.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I appreciate those recommendation letters, by the way. They were helpful, well written. And so you said that was May 2018. So that would be right after I won the primary for this seat, for my first election. Yeah. So, and then, I guess the assumption would be that I was going to win the general election as well, which was a good assumption. We nailed it. And here we are. And and now everything's wonderful because politics is great. So it's a whole new kind of battlefront, man. I get asked all the time. They're like, "Well, what's harder, like war or this kind of war?" And I'm like, this kind of war. I miss the other kind of war quite a bit. Even if you get nearly mortally wounded every once in a while, it is what it is. What's your What's one of the weirdest, craziest stories? I mean, you've told a couple, but like you've got other ones, like you had to help like amputate a leg or something one time. Like, what's give the audience some crazy SEAL stories.
Oh, well, gosh, I mean, that deployment, well, let me just back up. In that 2012, we were both overseas at the same time.
Yeah.
You know, Dan, one of the things
so
that
you were
that
commanding
really
SEAL
me,
Team 10 at the time? Two? Okay.
Two. Yep. And so, you know, for the audience, most of the SEALs were in Southeastern Afghanistan with me. There was a platoon in the south and a platoon in the west. And I actually didn't know that you were in country, Dan. I flew down to Kandahar to say hi to the SEALs that were down in the south. And so kind of had like dotted line authority, not like solid line authority over that group, but checked in on them from time to time. And the coolest thing was getting off that little plane, and you were standing there right on the tarmac, and you're like, "Hey, I heard you were coming in. I just wanted to say hi." And honestly, like to have seen your path from like 20-year-old to like laying up in training with a busted leg and you know, just the whole history. It was really, really powerful to see you standing there as a SEAL lieutenant overseas in Afghanistan. I had an event in my task force that happened where, you know, remember we had to have boots on the ground BDA, battle damage assessment. In other words, there was a very smart policy in some regards to say it's not a good idea to civilians in war, right? It's good to kill the enemy, bad to kill civilians. And so that was what the policy was intended to do. But the general in charge, General Allen, made a very blanket policy that said, after you drop a bomb, you will have to go physically see the area and get eyes on and confirm that you didn't kill any civilians.
Right.
It was intended as a chilling effect to not kill civilians, and that's a good thing to drive toward. However, when you're closer to the fight, you need to have the ability to do exception management and say, hey, this doesn't apply. So long story short, I'm rambling on too long, but this is a very, very, very parallel story for where you got injured, which is
it's exactly how I got injured.
It is. And so what happened in one evening was we ended up dropping bombs and killing something like 10 or 12 Taliban that evening. And we got told to go back in and go get boots on the ground, visual battle damage assessment. And I said, no, we're not doing it. There's definitely no civilians out at 3 a.m. We know this area really well. There's single road. It's always got IEDs on it. It's not risk that's worth assuming. And so I drew a really hard line and said, no, I'm not going to follow that. And the general called and said, look, I've got a policy. You've got to do this. And I said, no, sir, I'm not doing it. It's not a smart thing to do. And those are those moments in your career where you really, you know, he could fire me for that and say, go home. And you just have to take a stand. I took a stand and said, no, we're not doing it. Well, he sent the Afghan army via the Afghan chain of command in to go check that out. 3 vehicles go in. The first 2 hit IEDs, and it was either 4 or 5 Afghans got killed and several of them badly wounded. And I felt terrible about that part of it. But man alive, I was sure glad they were not Americans that got hurt or killed. And so, like, I made that hard decision. And Dan, the thing that sticks with me and really hurts me even to this day a lot is that I know if you were in my organization, I would not have sent you back in to go get you know, that boots on the ground BDA. And it really pains me. It's just I always feel terrible about that.
Yeah, it's a weird situation. I've talked about this before, maybe even on this podcast, but you know, ours wasn't quite that cut and dry. I'll say that. And I also always caveat it with like, I didn't have to go on that mission at all. I was like, there's a firefight, let's go. You know, we volunteer. Because my specific role, I was not the platoon commander at that time. I did do in many missions. I was a ground force commander, but only because I was the only other person qualified, and we were so busy that I would just take over missions occasionally. But on that particular mission, I was not. I was what's called a cross-functional team commander, and so I different roles, and I could just kind of be a shooter on a lot of these ops. It was a wonderful deployment. And so I always caveat that. It's like, a lot of times as guys on the ground, like, we don't really care what the mission is. If there's a hot situation, we want to go. And, you know, so it was a mix of like boots on the ground, battle damage assessment requirement between that and like maintaining presence. Either way, it's not a great strategic reason to go there. That is definitely accurate. But I also don't use that as an excuse, because I've always said, like, it would be really easy for me to sort of blame Obama for, this like top down PR move, which is basically what it was. And I'll never forget when General Mattis took over, and they dropped what was called the mother of all bombs, the Moab, on some big mountain and just killed a bunch of Afghan or Taliban in these cave networks. And he was getting a lot of pressure to go get that battle damage assessment on the ground. And he just very plainly said, as the Secretary of Defense, like, no, like, I'm just not doing that. So that was like a fundamental change in policy. And it's the right change in policy. And I don't like the premise of that policy in the beginning, because it makes it sound like we're always just willy-nilly targeting civilians or not caring if we accidentally hit a civilian. That's just never been true, ever. And I've never seen that. And it's a lot of problems with that policy right off the bat. But in ours, like, we went down there and the Marines, they kind of called it a QRF, but it wasn't really a QRF because the Marines didn't really, they didn't need to be saved, which is what a quick reaction force would usually be needing to do. But they were out of ammo, they were out of batteries, and there was a fight to be had. So, the strategic questions aside, that was what happened, and a new area, IEDs everywhere. I mean, that's how they get you. That's how they get you, because they're not going to beat you in a firefight.
Yeah, you hit on two really important things there. I think the most important is really not having regrets, because we choose to live our lives certain ways, and we take ownership and accountability for the actions that we undertake, and we go. We know what risk we're taking on. And then we just go do it, and that's what I love about you, and a lot of people who have been injured have the same kind of outlook of like, nope, I chose that path, no regrets. And then the other thing I will say though, Dan, is this is where our I'll call it like age or seniority difference in Afghanistan is a little bit different, because for me, I really carried the weight of like, are we making the right strategic decision? Yeah. Whereas like, I wasn't in like let's just go. I was much more always thinking, is the mission we're going on worth the risk that we are about to assume?
Right.
If yes, go crush it and win. If no, don't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is an enormously different calculation for sure. Did you lose anybody on that deployment?
No, we were very fortunate. The 6 task forces before us lost Americans, the 5 with us lost Americans, and the 6 after us all lost Americans. And to include, one of my really good friends, Joe Price, who when I went through SEAL training with, took over as the commander of the team behind me. He lost four of his team in the first month, and then took his own life in the bed that I had slept in for the previous 10 months, and a really good friend of mine. And, so no, to answer your question, I didn't, Dan. We had a lot of got shot up.
I remember that. I lost like some very good friends. I believe in that task force that you're talking about, my old roommate from Buds, Kevin Ebert. And then, I think 2 months after I was hit, lost a couple really good friends in a helicopter crash. It was shot down, like 2 months to the day after I'd been hurt. And, there was a good chance I would have been on that helicopter, if I had still been there. Do you want to talk about that? Because that's, veteran suicide but it's a scourge on our nation right now. But what you hear about a lot more rarely is the kind of suicide that you just referred to with Commander Price. We don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but I mean, your insight on that, and just giving people some insight onto what somebody in a command position is dealing with, and how that happened, why it happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have the exact answers, Dan, but I'll be glad to talk about it. The one thing I'll say is that I've been a number 2 at a SEAL team, and I've been a number 1. And when I was the second in charge, I thought I knew what it would be like to be overall in charge. I didn't realize what I didn't know at that time. Once I took over, I really felt a different weight on my shoulders. And it's inexplicable unless you've been there. And, in that deployment, I was carrying the weight of 2,000 people in my task force. and not in unhealthy ways, but in very responsible ways. And what transpired for Commander Joe Price is really, to me, also in many ways the Taliban. It's not direct fire, but I do really believe that our problem of suicide is in so many instances related to either blasts from training to go overseas and serve the nation, or whether you're a breacher, you're practicing shooting rockets, and you're around literally like concussive training events over and over in the same day. Or when you're overseas and when you really do start losing people, that's a challenge. But ultimately, suicide is, to me, an equal loss as if somebody was shot by the enemy. I just really deeply believe that. I've been very disappointed by some people who look at it as anything other than enemy action. I think we should hold up. Obviously, it's a challenging issue, but I believe that we should always hold up everybody's service as nearly equal, as equal, and just really give the same kind of praise for the service that those people did undergo. I know that Joe Price, he was just a tremendous human being, tremendous friend. We were roommates for my first 3 years in the SEAL teams. Really? There is no doubt in my mind that was a brain issue. That was not, Job Price didn't kill himself. A sick brain killed Job Price.
Really? Yeah, and that's what people don't realize either. Like it's so you don't think it was the weight of the responsibility, and even losing guys think like Joe Price, you dealt with that just fine, but there's other issues that people don't realize, like whether it's successive concussive TBIs, which happen in more ways than just an explosion or an IED. They happen in training. There's just a number of things that can lead to it, and it's sad. You don't see it until it's too late.
Yeah, it really is. It's really hard. And one of the things that I've done with my book, Dan, with Never Enough, is that I'm donating all of my profits to a 501c3, a charity that I started that pays off mortgages for Gold Star families. I'm currently paying off. We're right literally today in the process of buying our 5th house for the family of somebody who was killed in the middle of the Afghanistan war. Wonderful lady who lost her business during the pandemic, 4 children, and didn't own their own home. And So I feel really good. For me, the book is more than a book. There's a lot of great things and lessons. I'm of course biased, but I hope I'm pretty confident saying it's a solid piece of work. But for me, it's way more than a book. It's a mission. It's a mission to raise awareness and actually to literally raise money in order to go do great things for people who have paid the ultimate sacrifice and left their families behind.
That's awesome. I mean, I've never met stronger people than Gold Star families. I've met a lot, and I never see that sense of victimhood. I never see anything but strength and optimism, which is, you would imagine at least sometimes that I would see, some kind of weakness or self-destruction, and I just don't. It's really one of the most impressive things I've seen. I always talk about, SEALs are tough, but their wives are much tougher, because it's actually much harder, frankly, to do what they do. And that I know that seems weird at first, but it's true, because basically what we do is we go camping with our friends and we shoot things. Like that's basically what our job is, and we love doing it. But what a spouse has to do is not know what their loved one, or maybe the father of their children, is up to that day or night, not know when they're going to get that call, and then they do get a call. You know what? They're lucky if they get a call. I mean, the only consolation my wife, then fiance, had was that it was a call and not somebody at the door, because you know what happened when it's somebody at the door. But if you got the call, then it's it's bad, but it's not quite the person at the door. I mean, but what a crazy situation that even is. Like it's not as bad as having somebody at the door. I mean, to even go down that path, and that's the strength of these families, and it's really impressive, and it's not talked about enough. We always talk about veterans and what else can we do for the veterans? What else can we give veterans? And I don't mean to say that with contempt, but frankly, I think it's not talked about enough what we should be doing for Gold Star families. So I think that's awesome.
I think, I can bring your story to a real life situation. My first 30 days in Afghanistan as the commander, we were rocketed. Actually, it was the first 32 days in a row. It was our 33rd day was our first day when we did not get rocketed on the base that we were living on. And you start taking for granted, like, oh, these things kind of blow up around us, and hopefully it's not near me when it blows up.
Yeah.
That's just that just becomes normal, and it's really strange when that is normal. And there was one evening I was actually Skyping with my wife and daughter, and all of a sudden this big explosion went off. It sounded like it was maybe 30 to 40 or 50 yards away, and I just reflexively said, "Oh, that one was close." And they were like, "What was that?" And I just callously, without thinking, said, "Oh, we're just getting rocketed again." And I was like, that. Those were some of the worst words I ever could have said, because like you just reminded me, is that they don't know what's happening day in and day out, moment in and moment out, while I do. It's much worse to not know than to know. I'd also love to share, Dan, I in advance of this, I found another file during cleaning up a hard drive and moving everything to my cloud over the holidays. And I found actually some notes that I took like day in and day out, just how crazy some of Afghanistan was. But, after your injury, I actually came across this, and I said, I'm just going to read. I called Dan Crenshaw's dad and talked to Dan. Very moving. Said how proud I was of him, and how much I saw in him from the very beginning, and how meaningful seeing him in Kandahar as a lieutenant was. I talked with Dan's dad about strength, overcoming adversity, and recovery. It was an incredibly emotional conversation. Great man, great people. Those are my notes from 2012.
Yeah, that's awesome. And my dad certainly appreciated it. It's emotional for them. They don't get it. I always make fun of my dad for being a big baby about all this, but I have to be patient. But I have to be patient. I have to be patient about it. But that's awesome, and I appreciate it. I'll tell you another story from that time period, and it's a bit depressing because we lost this particular guy, Brett Merrihew. One of my classmates and buds, and phenomenal SEAL. And we lost him in a training accident, maybe a year or so after, maybe around 2013. But what Brett did was, when I was injured, so I walked away from the blast. Actually, I remember the whole thing. I was blind, but I didn't know why I was blind. I basically engaged in self-deception. And like just said that I had dirt in my eyes, and that's just what I believed. And I continued to believe that I would see again, even after I woke up and I was told that I was blind. Because they told me, they're like, well, there's a chance, okay. But between that moment, between like walking onto the medevac helicopter and waking up in Germany, there was a time period, and I was in basically a medically induced coma. And Brett sneaks into what I believe is Kandahar Hospital, because I moved to a couple different locations. I know that my eye was removed in Kandahar Hospital, and I think I moved somewhere else. He might have gone there, but I don't know. I can't remember. I'd have to ask some people. But he basically found like a lab coat, okay, and. And then like told people he was a doctor, just acted really confident, and then like snuck into by my bedside where I'm like unconscious. And then he proceeds to lift up my bed sheets to examine me, and then gets my wife on the phone. So you can imagine. So people will understand where this is going. He gets my wife on the phone and is like, It's fine, Tara. Like he's good. He's good down there. Like it's all intact. It is intact because I was wearing Kevlar underwear. So that was because I was torn up. Everywhere. My permanent damage was in my eyes, but like temporary damage was everywhere. Basically, like I got shot with a bunch of bird shot. Is kind of what I looked like throughout my whole body. But that was the kind of guy he was, man. What an amazing dude! Like it just got her on the phone and made her feel better. Because that's the teams for you.
Yeah, that's quite a story, and not surprising. I had never heard that, and something else I hadn't heard, Dan, which I love reading. Fortitude. Okay, actually, I audio booked it, but because
you like the sound of my voice.
When you, yeah, no, I thought it was super cool that you read it, but what I underappreciated was how, this is silly, but from Fortitude, how still you had to lay upside down during your recovery. Dude,
Yeah,
I was
that
overseas when you
sucked.
began your recovery. So there was a 4 month, or I don't even know, whatever it was, 6 month hiatus where, once you were back home and you were in better care, no offense, man, but I had better things to worry about than your recovery, because I knew I couldn't affect it at that point,
Yeah.
and so, anyways, I'd love to hear your, what you of course talk about it in your book, but I'd love to hear your, like, no kidding, no BS, like, dude, how hard was it to lay on your stomach so still for so long?
It's hard, but like, the thing that gets you through that is like you have hope of seeing again, because so by this moment, like the chances of me seeing something again were much better. So that this was the second surgery. The first surgery was basically fixing the cataract. So a trauma-induced cataract, meaning like the lens was destroyed in my eye from the blast, and it was a miracle that they got in there without detaching my retina, and kind of take the bandage off, and I can see shapes and colors, like super blurry, but I can see shapes and colors, which is to be expected because I have no lens. Okay, so it's actually what my vision looks like now when I wake up in the morning. I mean, right now I'm wearing a contact so I can kind of see, but I have to wear glasses to see up close, a very complicated vision. But then, because my retina was very damaged, didn't detach, but still very damaged, it was degenerating. And there's a reason it degenerates. It's because there's like a membrane on the back of your retina, and it creates tension. And, just evolutionarily speaking, we don't really know why it's there. So what doctors do is they just remove it, and it kind of stops the macular degeneration. Macular degeneration meaning the degeneration of your retina. And when they pull that membrane off to make sure your retina remains, pressed up against the back of your eye after the trauma associated with surgery, they put a gas bubble in your eye. So I went blind for 6 more weeks because I have this giant gas bubble in my eye, which is like crazy. But also people tattoo their eyes. That's also crazy. So you'd be surprised what kind of needles and crap you can stick in somebody's eye, and it's fine. Don't tattoo your eye. Just not you, Mike. I know you're not going to do that, but
public service announcement.
Yeah, just more of a PSA. Just like, don't tattoo your eye. I got asked about, because my fake eye. I'm not even wearing a fake eye now. It's just empty. But but when people see it, I would get asked, like, is that a tattoo on your eye? And I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? And they're like, somebody, I remember this situation happened. They're like, look, I'm not crazy. And they showed me a YouTube video of somebody getting their eye tattooed, and I was like, do I look like the kind of guy who just happens to, like, do I have black fingernails and tattoos on my face? Like, I'm not that guy, really. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. So to recover from that surgery, yeah, you got to be face down. And look, I'll be honest. Like, I'm still on tons of pain meds. I barely remember the whole thing. I listened to audiobooks all day long. I had an obsession with white chocolate mochas, and I would just drink those and, like, take my Vicodin and listen to audiobooks and, like, sit in this chair. And it's just, but you get through it because it's like, look, there's an end date to it. When things are hard when you don't know the end date, right? When there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Like, you want to talk about, like, a real conversation about suicide. I think that's what it is. When people feel like they have no way out, when there's no light at the end of the tunnel, that's when it's hard. And sometimes you have to create that light at the end of the tunnel for yourself, which is hard. That takes a degree of mental fortitude. And if and in many ways I had to do that also, because it's like, okay, even if I can see a little bit again, it's like, well, can I do anything from that? And if I can't, then how am I going to live my purpose and live a life that I'm even proud of and even want to live? I mean, and then you have to sort of create that reality for yourself. And that's hard. Like, there's no easy answer to how to do that except to just decide to do it. And you decide to do it by saying, like, I'm just capable of it. Like, I'm a victor, not a victim. And which is, another theme I write about quite a bit. But yeah, but the right answer is, like, white chocolate mochas, some drugs and audiobooks. That's how you get through that kind of crap.
Well, it's amazing. It's amazing. And Dan, the other thing in your book that I actually didn't even really know about you, and I'm embarrassed to say, but like, I underappreciated the positive effect your mom had on you. Your mother was just a terrific woman. obviously, really taught you how to be a victor in so many different ways, right? I would love to hear, as I just wrote my book, I wrestled with how open do I be in a book? How did you think that through as you clearly were so positively impacted by your mother, and at the same time dealt with how much do I open up?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess you just have to, right? Although, I mean, I suppose I could have opened up more, but, that was, in any case, yeah, she was certainly like the epitome of a hero, as a hero in the truest of senses, meaning like somebody who you can build an archetype out of and truly look up to and say, if I live according to the values and actions of this person, you will be better off in life. My mom embodied that. I mean, she died of cancer when I was 10, but before that, had just gone through 5 years of treatment, and I just don't remember. I always remember positivity and optimism, and just never complaining about it to your kids. It's very easy to even just show weakness and to complain about something. We're kind of divas in the SEAL teams. We complain a lot, but we complain a lot about the little stuff and not so much about the big stuff. And when it's really hard, it's time to sack up and actually get through it. And I learned that from a 35-year-old woman and my mother. And yeah, I mean, it was just, it was hard writing about that. I don't know. I frankly just probably talked about it so much by the time I wrote about it that it wasn't that hard. So it wasn't the first time I'd ever had to open up about it. But, if you're going to connect with people, you have to. You have to.
Well, I see a trait that you described in your mom in you when I was leading the workouts when you were in college, right? And let me describe what that was. One of the things, as I'm looking through very seriously, like 10 or 15 people to say who should go be a SEAL, I'm not looking at how many push-ups somebody can do in a row. I'm looking at what you just kind of alluded to, which is not knowing when something's going to end. So what I'm looking at is a situation where you don't know what you're going to have to do next. The whole group of 15 SEAL aspiring college students don't know what's coming around the corner. What I'm looking at is every time you finish your 2-mile timed run and you think you're on easy street, and then I turn around and say, hey, let's just go do that again. You got to beat your previous time. Like seeing people's reactions in those moments is actually a thing. I could care less what somebody's time is. I'm looking at their spirit. I'm looking at their soul and their character and how do they act when things are really, really difficult. And what I always saw in you was not that quarter or half a step of like, oh, I wish, woe is me. I wish this wasn't me. Because, everybody will go run that second race. But what in that little instance where your brain is wrapping your head around the fact that you have to do it again, it usually comes through in your body language. And yours was always, always, always drive, determination, let's go crush it mentality. And anyways, and I'm sure you got that from your mom.
Yeah, I guess I did. It's good to know that now in hindsight, like that's what you were looking for. But it's also true. It's just good advice for maybe young guys who are thinking of going through buds. It's exactly what they do all the time in buds. It feels endless, which is why people quit. I mean, Hell Week is the epitome of that. It really feels. I mean, yeah, technically it's going to end. It starts on Sunday. It ends like Friday early afternoon. So technically, there's an end date, but that's a really far away end date when like you're already at your max. I mean, you hit your body fails you immediately when that thing starts. Just because, I mean, you can only do so many push-ups in a course of a few minutes. It's just how it works. It's not just push-ups. It's boats. It's running with the boats on your head for what I think some have estimated to be almost 200 miles throughout that week. Which is just absurd. Like it's just completely absurd. But yeah, you can only do it when you're in your early 20s. Yeah, it's just like never freaking ends. It's like they're just the beat downs. And yeah, it's just that's what gets you to quit. What else? We've been going on for about a week. So how do you want to end? Any last things we should know about the book or whatever you want to talk about? Any last words?
Well, I would just say that ultimately it's all about service and impacting others, right? A lot of people thank you and people like you and I for our service. And the thing I like to do is turn around and say, well, thank you for yours. Everybody ultimately has different gifts, different abilities, different interests. And I think what makes this nation great is that everybody is called to serve. And so what I'd love to, in kind of the closing thoughts, I'd love to try to get people thinking about, while they might not be SEALs or they might not go, represent their state in Congress, what are the ways that you can that listeners can positively impact their own families, their communities, their state, their country, and make this nation as great as it possibly can be? I mean, that's ultimately what it's about, is contributing in giving back. And that's really what Never Enough is about. It's certainly some stories to entertain, but the stories are very hand selected in order to illuminate larger points around how we all can be better.
Yeah.
So no, that's it, Dan.
It's about citizenship. To put it, I guess, to summarize it. Mike, thanks for being on, man. It's great to reconnect and great to rehash and see you kept all our text messages, which is dangerous for a politician, but I think they're probably fine.
Don't worry. You're totally airtight. Don't worry.
All right. Hey, thanks for being on, Mike, and it was great to see you again, brother.
Yeah. Brother Dan, good to see you too, man. So proud of you, and keep crushing it. So nice to be here with you.
Awesome. All right.